So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here today and sharing this, the new drop standard that Schlumberger has launched recently last year. And I would like all of you to just take a good look at this picture, because this is the only picture I'm going to show today, right, before I take you to the technicalities of my presentation. This is a typical scene that everybody who has been remotely even related to oil and gas sector in some way would be familiar with. The only difference is that usually we look at the rig floor from the bottom, how the people are working, and this is a top view of that rig floor. Now I'll give you a scenario. There are 4 people in this picture. Imagine one is a directional driller, right, who has the experience of, let's say, 20 years and brings a lot of value to my company. You have other 2 people of fairly good experience. And then you have one trainee, right? First day on the job, he's still trying to test the waters, doesn't know what is supposed to be there, and just for trying to follow instructions, and find the bearings. Imagine in this situation, there is a 5th person who's not in the picture, but that person is on the monkey port, right? Trying to guide those drill pipes, helping them to basically connect the drill pipes, etc. And now we have a crossover that falls from the top onto the rig floor. Your best case scenario is that the crossover fell, it did not hit anybody, it did not harm anybody, and that's it. So your loss in that scenario is what? Your crossover, right? Damage to the rig floor, and hopefully you can continue the job after that. Now, the crossover dropped, right? Let's make it more complex. This crossover was holding a drill pipe. The drill pipe came undone. The drill pipe dropped into the well. Once again, nobody was hurt, great, but you have lost time now. So depending on your rig cost, because for whatever reason the drill pipe dropped, you have now lost time. And imagine if this scenario happened on your deep water rig, which costs you $1 million a day, you can imagine the cost, right? Typical scenarios I'm talking about. The worst case scenario, which nobody likes to think of or get a call about, is that crossover or drill pipe hit somebody, right? Chances of somebody surviving that are almost next to nil. So question is, today, as a service provider to all the oil companies or operators, does it make sense for me, right? And when I say me, as Schlumberger, to have something in place which helps me to do the operation safely, right? Helps my people to do the operation safely, right? And in turn, help my operators, my clients, to ensure that they do not incur losses. And that's where we're coming from when I talk about the new drop standard, which was launched last year in Schlumberger. What is drops? So it covers 2 broad categories. The first is the objects falling from height, and the second it covers is the work at height. That means I could be down, and let's say something falls on me, and second, I could be up there working, and I could fall from that height. So both the aspects of the operations are covered as a part of the standard. Now moving on, please keep this picture in mind as we move on, and I'll conclude with this picture again. So in the recent years, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, Schlumberger has been undergoing a change, a transformation, where we are revising our standards on more risk-based approach. What does that mean? Our earlier standards were a bit like one size fits all. We take pride in the fact that we are the leaders when it comes to safety, and we have introduced a lot of safety features and standards into the oil and gas operations. But now, as the operations become complex, we need to manage the risk and have controls in place which are tailor-made. At the higher level, we have fundamental controls which apply to all of our employees and contractors, irrespective of the part of the world you're working in, irrespective of the segment you're working for. And then you have the risk-based controls, which are broadly divided into the segment operations, depending on the operations you're running for the operators, and your site risk, because every facility or every rig site is not the same, let's say. And finally, I'd like to conclude later on. I'll go into more details. What is a site drops map and procedure? We have divided, in order to make sure that how do we standardize this rollout of the standard, right? We have developed a drops risk matrix, which essentially covers both the dynamic drop objects risk, that means your crane operations, your forklift operations, and your static dropped objects risk, that means storage at heights. It could be the lights in this room, or it could be essentially your the monkey pot, let's say, right, in this case. These are broadly divided into 5 more categories, which is lifting and hoisting, operational conditions, working at height, facilities and equipment, and unsecured items. The idea, once again, is to standardize and determine the risk is same across a similar situation, irrespective of the part of the world you're in. Now, who does this standard apply to? Schlumberger today does not just do work on well sites. We have manufacturing centers, we have training centers, we have contractors, employees, consultants. It doesn't matter what capacity you're working in for us, right? It applies to you. So I could be in sourcing and procurement. I need to make sure that the equipment that I get from a supplier is as per our standard. Because if it's not, then something is going to happen, and we don't want to go there. Manufacturing, construction, what we manufacture should be as per our standards. Repair and maintenance, operations, transport, so on and so forth. In all the aspects, once again, the approach remains the same. Fundamental controls, which apply all across the board. Risk-based, depending on what you're doing. So the risk of what you have in a manufacturing center will be different than a well site. And then you have site-specific controls, depending on the facility or the well site you're working on. So the drop standard, like I mentioned, is the ownership of this standard and the deployment rests with the line management in Schlumberger, and they are the ones who are the owners of it. If I look right from the top, if you look at the pyramid that is on the right, the toolkit that I'm displaying here, blueprint is the identity of Schlumberger. That means this defines the mindset with which we work and our core values. Obviously, the QHSE policy, that goes without saying for any of the companies, it doesn't matter which industry you're on. And underneath that, we have the drop standard, which goes into more detail of what levels of compliance we need to have. But this is, again, a slightly higher level document. How do I make sure that this standard is implemented, right, at the ground level? I have something known as a drops book now in my hand, let's say, right? It tells me the details of step by step, that what is a classification of drop objects, how I'm going to manage this risk, and so on and so forth. Then we have a drops risk register, the map, and the procedure itself, which I'll go into details now. So the book, like I mentioned, goes into further details, and it helps me to identify the risk, and it helps the people on the ground, depending on where they are, identify the risk. Now, there are 2 focal points here. We have the drop segment focal points. That means if I'm a segment operator, then I need to look at this. And so from a higher level perspective, right, if I'm doing a drilling operation across Schlumberger and I have a certain rig template that I can take, identify the risk, and roll it across, so that now this becomes the baseline for any of my engineers who are working in the drilling operation on the rig. And then who's going to implement that baseline is going to be my drops field champion, right? So person on the site who is trained in order to identify the risk, help cover the risk through prevention and mitigation measures. Coming to the drops risk register, it is simply an Excel sheet which is like a consolidated version of all the risks which are on the site, right? Visually identified and rolled out to the people for easy understanding. So here's an example of a register. What you see here is that essentially on the left you have the pictures of the site of what the drops risk involved. It could be the crane operation, it could be an overhead crane, it could be a storage which is at a height in a store. And then what is the risk? Now, is it high, low, right, extreme? This is based on an automated calculator. So typically in very layman terms, if I want to say, the more the height of the object, the more the severity, and similarly, the heavier the object, the more the severity. So the risk increases according to those 2 factors, and this is already automated in the register. Now, how do I visually bring this to everybody, right? This is where a site drops zone map is a tool that helps me do that. So if I'm a contractor or an employee walking into a new facility, if I have a map and I know, okay, this is a low risk zone, I can walk here, there is no danger of dropped objects, but this is a red zone, so if I don't have the authority to go there, I should not be going there. Very visual, just to overcome the language barrier, something which is a quick snapshot of where I can go and not go, especially when I'm in a new facility, I'm not familiar with the operations. This is just an example of the drops map, and essentially for this one, who makes it and how makes it, people take a walk around, they identify it in the risk register, and then we make the map. It's like a consolidation of a facility or site and something very visual that helps me manage the risk at a higher level. Now, coming to the deployment responsibilities, the line management in Schlumberger is responsible for the implementation of the drop standard. The drop segment focal points, they are responsible for the completion of segment register. That means for most of the common operations that we do on a daily basis for our clients, that needs to be captured here, and that becomes the baseline for the people on the ground to basically expand on it. Now, the person who will guide you through this process, it would be a trained drops field champion, like I said, who will help you with the zone evaluation and putting the procedure in place and manage the risk. And finally, the site personnel who will be compliant once they're familiar with the site drops register. With this, I'd like to go back to my first picture. Now imagine the scenario again in this picture. I have 4 people on the ground, right? The senior most guy who brings value to my company, I have a trainee, and I have 2 fairly experienced guys on the rig floor, plus a 5th guy who's at the top. Now, if all these people have the basic awareness training, they would know that the rig floor is a high-risk area, right? I need to keep clear because there's a potential that something can fall. The guy at the monkey port would know that, okay, I need to wear the harness, and this is the procedure I need to follow. He would make sure that the checklist is done, right? The supervisor would make sure that the preventive maintenance of the top drive is done, or the procedure is very clear. So in a nutshell, does it make sense to have a drop standard and make all this investment that goes into it? Yes, it does, and that's what we have done. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. For me, I never actually went to any jig and this kind of site. So it's difficult to summarize, but what I understood, like this is a challenge for any HSE professional, that if you have different level of skill set, the employees, and still the process is so visual, so manageable, that across the whole chain, starting from your segment register to the line people, and everybody sees the same way to make it executable, especially with your risk identification of the levels, these 5 levels, and then the color coding makes very impressive that it can be executed. What possibly I can still ask you that when you did this, is it just you are doing it now, or it has been already done and you have some benefits already coming in?
No, so...
you can use the mic maybe, yeah.
So quick answer to your question. We rolled out the standard last year, and we did an initial analysis, right? The gap analysis has been done, let me put it this way. The benefits is today, we recently did a safety meeting across INM where we did an activity where we gave the registers which had been prepared, and all the people went out to see, what can happen, and the amount of awareness it brings, just becoming familiar. Oh, I have been working in this area and I did not know that something like this could fall, right? So if you get that awareness, next time you're going and working in that area, you will be more careful. Or you will say, do I really need that thing on the top, and bring it down. So yes, it has brought value. Is it tangible today? No, right? Will it help me prevent incidents in the future? Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
All the best for that.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Yes.
If you are very direct, okay, related to this you can, but you need a mic. Okay, right out. In general, we'll park the question so that we together take it, but maybe as an exception.
Yeah, myself Gaurav from Oil India. I am directly related to a person she has shown to us. So I am very familiar. My direct question is that I have seen some drop standards prepared by IADC. what the extent your IIDC, your standard is different from our IIDC standard?
So
Is it
I'm-
same or different?
So I'm not familiar with the other one, I'll be very honest, because
Okay.
for any standard rollout that we have in the company, we have a champion. So there's a lady who's the champion of this standard, who compares and sees the various industry standards and makes sure that we comply with them. So for example, if OSHA has a standard, IGP has some sort of regulation, right? The matrix that you see actually covers that. Since I'm not familiar, so I cannot say what is the difference.
Yeah, but I have seen the workflow is similar to IIDC workflow. That's why I'm asking this question.
Yeah, but
Ah,
I think,
okay.
I think what the core of her presentation was about deployment more than the standard as such. So I will say, we tried to see that how she made it executable.
Now, at the IIDC also same thing. They have
Yeah.
also done in the executable. One more question I have asked, that in IIDC, that crane operation, crane drop object is also included. Whether in your standard, drop standard, that is included or not?
It is included under the 5 hazard categories that I showed you. If I may go back to my presentation, then in one of them is actually under the dynamic loads, right, where we talked about the 5 categories and they're primarily distributed into dynamic and static loads, or the drop objects. The dynamic one actually covers the cranes, the forklifts, and the overhead cranes, so the mobile and the overhead.
Okay.
It is covered in there.
Okay.
And part of actually the fundamental controls is a lift plan. That means no lift should be done without a lift plan in order to prevent something falling, or a train toppling over.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am. Thank you. I got your point.
Thank you.
very much.
For the benefit of timing, now we